Hi there. I'm just checking I'm live because this is my third attempt to go live on this group. Both times I've had an epic fail, so bear with me, please. Okay, this is Anne Scott, Trauma Informed Parenting. I'm just coming on to do a quick live about what is trauma, because I've been getting a lot of questions lately. I've had a huge amount of people joining the group this last few weeks from a lot of forums for parents with PDA, ADHD, ASD, autistic disorder. So a lot of the people that I'm talking to don't really understand what these things have to do with trauma. So I'm going to cover that a wee bit. Sorry, I'm still trying to see if I'm even live. I'll keep talking in the hopes that I am. That there is a huge link between these diagnoses and these challenges that our children have and trauma. And I was a foster carer for years and had lots of children living in my home with my family who had trauma. I also have a daughter who has pathological demand avoidance, and I couldn't believe the similarities between these two things and the behaviours that they had, and how similarly these techniques helped. When I learned this technique, I did it to help my child with trauma. I could never have known that it would make such a huge difference to my daughter with PDA and to my own neurotypical daughter as well, just the same. And to me and to all my relationships. So it's not just about it's not just about children who are in care or adopted, that have come from a background of trauma. It's for anyone that's been through extreme stress and extreme fear, which is a lot of us. I mean, they're saying now that lockdown itself is a trauma. You're adding that to adverse childhood experiences list, seemingly. It's going to be another ace. So I suppose it's understanding what is trauma. So the definition of trauma is any, I might have to read this, I won't remember it, is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming and unpredictable, and when such events go on unexpressed, unprocessed and misunderstood. So that's the difference between a short-term stressful event and a long-term traumatic event, something that turns into a trauma and affects you through your life. So the difference is, if you have something really bad happen in your life, which we all do, life is hard, it's stressful, things happen, is if you have the opportunity to talk about that and cry about that and talk about it some more and cry about it some more and express it and process it and understand it, then that's when you can recover and you can move on, and it's not going to hold you back in life. It's not going to be coming up for you all the time. Yes, it's something you can remember and it'll still maybe be stressful, but it's not a trauma. But often our children, firstly, children with trauma often have come to us, or they've experienced the stressful event and not had that opportunity to talk about it, to understand it, to express it. And even our own kids, we're not brought them up all the time to talk about the stressful events. As parents, we're certainly, quite guilty of telling them it's okay, don't worry about it, it's nothing to worry about, don't be stressed out, don't be silly, why say you're scared of that, there's nothing to be scared of. We didn't grow up being allowed to express how we felt, and we often find that hard for to allow our children that. So even well-rounded families can have children with trauma. Things happen, life is hard, and our stress affects our kids. But with kids that have a diagnosis of ADHD, PDA, ASD, they are constantly, their brains are going into fight and flight. So these kids are terrified of the world, in my experience, certainly, that everything is scary to them. Constant triggers and transitions are so difficult. They're in that constant fight and flight in the brain. And that is where the trauma is coming from, is from being in that constant state of stress and fear and survival. That is creating trauma. And often children with PDA, ASD aren't able to find ways, or don't have the skills to process that, express that, and understand that. And that is why it's turned into trauma, because they might not be able to talk, they might not be able to understand what's happened to them, but they just know they're scared and they know they're stressed. So that is where children with these diagnoses are often also children that are suffering from trauma. And that's no parent's fault. There's no blame in that. You know, there was nobody that took me aside and told me this was happening for my daughter. I didn't understand that she had trauma. I didn't understand that my other daughter had trauma because she grew up with a sister who, you know, targeted her and would hit her and hurt her and shout at her and call her names. And, you know, she had to get dragged out of places along with me and my daughter in Meltdown. You know, she was 2 years old running behind me picking up the wellies as they get kicked off. And, you know, there was a lot of stuff happened in her life that she had to deal with as a young child that creates trauma. And I wasn't in a place in my life where I could say, right, let's talk about that. How do you feel about that? I was just dealing with what I could cope with, which was like I was drowning every day with this going on, and every day this cycle of constant meltdown and stress in my home that I didn't understand, because back then there was no diagnosis of PDA. They didn't even tell me she was on the spectrum. I had no idea. She was deaf, she had learning difficulties, that was all I knew. And PDA wasn't even a thing. So there was no forums for me to go on to and speak to about it. And I didn't understand that it was trauma that was happening to my daughter, and both my daughters, and to me, until I started to live with a child with trauma and I could see the similarities. And this model that I teach and that I talk about and that I can evidence how it's changed for both my child with trauma and my child with the diagnosis of, sorry, she's not the diagnosis. My child, I'm sure, absolutely 100% has pathological mental illness. So people say to me, I've spoken to quite a few parents lately about their struggles. There's so many people in crisis and their kids aren't going to school and their mental health's really suffering, especially children that are on the spectrum with trauma. Is they say, well, why are they? Because I tell parents all the time, your child is not choosing these behaviours. Your child cannot help these behaviours. It is an unconscious thing that they do not want to be doing these things, but they don't know what else to do. They don't know how to change it. They don't know how to stop it. They're in a state of stress and fear, and they are triggered back into their worst moments and they've ever had experienced. They believe the worst thing in those moments that's happened to them is about to happen again. And parents say to me, what are they stressed about? What are they scared about? They can't see where this is coming from. But our kids are constantly experiencing stress, especially kids with trauma and kids with all these diagnoses. So you have triggers and transitions. They are massive for our kids. If we can start to understand that and start to see the fear and the stress that they're experiencing, you're going to feel very differently towards your child in these moments. When you see a stressed, scared child, than if you see a child that you think is willfully choosing to do these things to you. So if you can be aware that there is taste, touch, sound, smell, sight coming at our kids all the time, we know that, but there's also temperature, movement, and hunger are all triggers. Now, our kids are highly, highly sensitive to that, more so because of their needs. If you imagine going into a school environment and all of the senses coming at our kids constantly, all the time, all the time, all the time, and it's getting more and more and more and more and more. That's why some kids can't get by lunchtime without having a meltdown, because by then there's been too many triggers, too much bottling, shoving, and noise, and shouting and talking and smells and movement and hunger. All these things are adding and adding and adding and adding stress. And eventually our child's going to go out of their window of tolerance of how much stress they can manage in a day. And that's when they go into fight and flight. They go into the fear part of the brain, and the brain shuts down and it makes no sense. They can't think clearly. They don't know what they're doing in that moment. And they don't remember what they've done. Their short term memory has gone completely in that moment. And they don't even know they've done the behaviour. The behaviour is just a knee jerk reaction to the stress and the fear. That's why you often ask your child, why did you do that? And they don't know. They don't know why they did it. They don't actually know why they did it. Their brain is shut off. They're not making any sense. And then we come in often with consequences and punishments for these behaviours. And all that does is add more stress onto an already stressful situation. Now, a few weeks ago, I did a video on here. I talked about all behaviours derived from a state of stress. So if you want to know more about that, you can go back and find that video. But this is just pointing out what is triggering that fear and stress in our kids. It's just, life is so scary. And at the moment, it's amplified by 100 because of COVID. Everyone around them is stressed out. The teachers are stressed out. The parents are stressed out. The kids are stressed out. And that's our kids are so sensitive to everyone else's stress. So that's adding more stress on top of the stress they're already experiencing just being at school or just being out in the world. Is all too much. And transitioning all the time, transitioning from the house to the car to the school to the playground to the classroom to the lunch hall, all day transitions, transitions, transitions. That is more stress and more stress and more stress. You think about how stressful that is. It's like that's a great story about the bottle of Coca-Cola shaking and shaking and shaking and shaking all day, and eventually it come home and you'll turn the lid and boom, the meltdown comes. Because our kids see us and we're a safe person and they can feel safe enough. And it's not a conscious choice. They just see us and that Coca-Cola comes out. That fizzes out and they kick off. We can learn how to stay calm in the face of that. I can't tell you the difference that it's made in my life, and with all of my relationships, but especially with my child with trauma and my child with PDA, especially through lockdown as well. And it wasn't until recently I was thinking about this model because I'm teaching it to people, and obviously when I talk to people, I try and explain it, but it wasn't till I noticed. I was thinking about it the other day that I haven't had one time since I learned this model about 3 years ago that it hasn't worked for me, that it hasn't helped me to stay calm and to see what was going on and be able to manage the situation. And I always come back and I'm amazed myself at how quickly things have de-escalated. I often will come round to my husband and say, wow, and before you know it, it'll be all kicking off and I'll be saying, right, okay, doing my breathing, I'm calming myself down, I know what I need to do. And I'll say to him, right, here goes. And I'll go in. And every single time I come out going, wow, that was great. That actually worked really well, and that I ended really great. Even with my normal royal, not um, neurotypical, is that what we call it, daughter. It works. It helped me to build that connection. It helped me to help us be safe and connected again in those moments of stress and fear. It helps me to see my fear and see my child's fear and see what's causing the behaviour. And when I look at my child and I see a stressed, scared child, I feel very differently than I would if I looked at my child and I saw a child that was choosing these behaviours or doing these behaviours to me to hurt me, which is what I used to think. But what a difference when I could just shift that perspective and see my child's fear and how, when you see that behaviour, when you see that absolute meltdown, that kicking and screaming and spitting and swearing that we get often with our kids, how scared would you need to be doing that? How extreme would, and a fear of, if somebody came to your house and tried to steal you, tried to abduct you, that's the way you would behave. That's what you would do. You would scream and yell and bite and kick for your life. That is what your child is doing. That is how scared your child is in that moment. They are scared for their lives. And just because we can't see that fear and we can't see where it's coming from doesn't mean it's not there. When a child is, when a stressed out child is in a moment of stress and fear and triggered by all of this overwhelming stress and that is sending them and absolutely overwhelming them out of their window of tolerance, they believe in that moment because their brain fills with all that stress hormone, and they believe in that moment that the worst thing that has ever happened to them is about to happen again. That same terror is up in their brain and they're back in that moment. So, you may well have a good idea what that could be for your child. Sometimes we don't know what it is, but see the fear. If you can see the fear and you can see the trauma, then you can start to attend to your child. Sorry, my glasses are you can start to attend to your child in a very different way than you would if you thought they were choosing it and did it to you. And it's getting better at being able to not take it personally. I've had to really work hard at doing it, but now I can most of the time not take it to heart and I just see it. The behaviour tells me my child is scared. And I have to stop and breathe and trigger my own oxytocin in my brain and start to my thinking come back online, because in that moment of stress and fear, I'm stressed and I'm triggered as well, and I'm not making any sense. There's so much to this technique. It's not as simple as just coming on and doing a quick live session. I couldn't cover everything, no way. But there is a workshop next week. You're welcome to message me about joining it. There's a lot of parents joining it that are of these forums of ADHD, PDA, and ASD, and other similar diagnosis. I cannot tell you how powerful this is, how it's changed everything in my home. My daughter doesn't have meltdowns. She can express herself. I now know how to help her express herself. I'm not scared of it when she's stressed out anymore. And I can see it building, and I can say, oh wow, look, you're really stressed today. I can see that. Let's get it out. And we jump together and we scream together and we yell and we get it out and we do our breathing together. And she draws it and she colours it and she gets it out any way she can. She expresses it and expresses it and expresses it and processes it as much as she can, so that it's not being pushed down, and coming out as behaviours. Because when we don't give our kids the opportunity to express that and get it out somehow that's more appropriate, then they're going to fall. They're going to push it down. They're going to push, because we often see the behaviour and we see the cheek, and we see the screaming and the yelling and the swearing, and we see that and we get frightened and stressed and we try and push it down. We want to make it stop. We want to make it go away. That's our stress and fear telling us that we have to make that stop, because we're not making any sense. And we try and push it down. And all our children are left with is behaviours. There's nowhere else for that to go. It has to come out somewhere. And if we're not letting it come out in other ways, it's going to come out as behaviours. It's got to come out. And I cover all this in the workshops, and I talk about how it worked for me. I talk about the difference it's made for me, and when I start to apply this trauma lens, the change in all my family, my child with trauma, my child with PDA, and my normal child, and me and my relationships with everyone around me, me and my husband's relationship. So much better. We're better at communicating. We're better at letting each other express how we feel without each other getting triggered by it, and they're better at managing. Because I hear so many parents talking about the fights they have with each other because they are. Sorry, some comments can't just finish this. Because they are both coming from a different angle, parenting, and they're butting heads, and that's adding more stress. So you've got to see how, if you have to both be on the same page, and how you can do that. My husband suffered from trauma both in his childhood and in the military. He hadn't processed, and lockdown has been hard for him, absolutely. His alcohol dependence causing my child and my trauma, yes. And that is one of the biggest things in this model, is that it's our trauma that's actually a lot of the problem. It's not our fault, there's no blame. But if we are children of trauma, which a lot of us are, we've all come from backgrounds of trauma in some way. Nobody escapes life without it. And that has been re-triggered in our moments of stress and fear with our child and the world around us. That has been re-triggered, and that's affecting our child. And until we do the work on ourselves, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep that cycle going. But we're not very good at wanting to do that work. We all kind of want to just push it down and make it go away. But what I found is, if I can work on me and I can reduce my stress, then I can help my partner and I can help my kids. If I can just work about, you can't change anyone else. You can't make anyone else do anything. All you can manage is yourself. But by just reducing your own stress around that, and working on breathing and working on your thoughts around that and what's been triggered for you, because in those moments when your husband is triggered, you also will be triggered into whatever your stuff is, into your own stress and fear. So starting to recognize your own fear, seeing that it's coming up for you, being able to work on managing that, which I talk about a lot in the workshops, then you can hold the space for your partner or for your kids. That your calm affects them. We actually have a chemical reaction with each other. So if we can be calm, then we can help the people around us to feel safer and calmer. So there's another week. Trying to get it. See all of it. Thank you. I'm an outreach worker and unpaid carers, and we help a lot of families with additional needs. We've shared your page. Thank you. And the workshop details, I'm sure, will be helpful on next week. There'll be other ones. I'm putting them on all the time, so don't worry about that. Yeah, I just keep putting the dates on the group because there's too much of a need for it, and it's. I mean, I'm trying to get funding for this so we can keep doing it for free. And I tried putting it out and selling tickets, but when I see people in need that can't buy a ticket, I'm not going to sit here with this information and not share it with them. So I've just decided to do it anyway. I don't care if I don't have funding. Like you say, I'm unpaid carer. I'm an unpaid carer too, but I'm also an unpaid um, charity worker because it's got to be. This is too important. I wish someone had taken me aside and told me this years ago. My life could have been so different, and so could my kids' lives. And a lot of the kids I had in my care, I didn't know this at the time. It wasn't until my last placement that I really discovered this and saw the difference that it could make. So I had to be aware of what was happening in my own brain and what was coming up for me in those moments, and how just by changing how I responded changed everything in my home. And it's, as I say, it's not about blaming and it's not about shaming, because how do you know if no one has ever told you? You don't. Nobody told us this stuff. We weren't brought up being told that we should be allowed to say how unhappy we were or how unfair it felt or how angry we were. And being able to allow my children to actually tell me that they're really angry with me and they're really unhappy with me and that it's not fair, and just be okay with that. And it didn't mean that I wasn't going to stick to my boundaries. They have to stay, but it's okay for them to be upset with me and for me not to get my knickers in a twist. I was always yelling and screaming and telling them, don't you dare speak to me like that, and you don't know how lucky you are. All my old generational stuff from my parenting was coming up. But yeah, I'll pay a mute as we'll be able to find a Zoom session. I'm sorry, I can't see the rest of that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm putting on. If anyone's interested in having me do a workshop, PM me. I can put them on for any groups. I'm happy. And what's wonderful about lockdown is that this has widened the reach of this, because it was always just Scotland. I went round in Scotland and I gave workshops, but now we're online and there's no stopping us. We can go anywhere from here. And the thing is, people are finding this so helpful. There was a lady just last week with some real crisis, and she's been messaging, and she put a comment on one of the forums saying how it's starting to change things already in her home after a week. It's so powerful. And I read all these families and these people. It's heartbreaking, the posts on these forums, how they're struggling and there's no help. So anyone any parents that that you think will benefit from this, then please, please, please tag us in posts and tell them about it. Share the group with them, because it's transformed things for me and it's transformed things for many, many other people who are struggling. Okay, I think I'm going to log off because I just tend to ramble and talk forever and I don't actually think it make any sense after a while. But yes, anyone PM me, message me, ask me. I'm happy to do workshops and put them on. Okay, and there is a workshop on Thursday if you're interested in attending from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. And I can send you the link to that on Zoom. Okay? But remember to breathe, guys. That is what changed everything for me. It's when I learned that by just calm breathing, simple as that, by doing 3 to 10 slow, deep breaths all through the day, keeping doing it, not waiting until I was stressed, doing it when I was just calm, but keeping doing it, was triggering in oxytocin and helped me reduce the stress in my brain, and that was affecting my kids and it was affecting everyone around me. That has been a game changer for me. It's so simple, it's almost ridiculous that I didn't know it years ago. Okay, so remember to breathe. Thanks very much.